Okay, in this presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the move north. We're going to take a look at what I would call reconnoitering adventurers. They call them discoverers, they call them conquistadores, they call them trailblazers, but we'll take a look at what they're really doing is they're on a reconnaissance adventure. And one of the things is the crown wants to find out what it is that it's laying claim to. So there's all kinds of men who are going to go with expeditions, other men, and they're going to venture north so that they can map out the territory. And then they can come back and report to the Audiencias that are in control in Havana, Cuba, and in central Mexico, and then ultimately to the king, because they want to find out what it is that they are taking over. So I call them reconnoitering adventurers. They're coming out and they're in reconnaissance. So they're going into areas, they're going in with their prejudices, their attitudes towards native peoples, which are very negative. And once the conquest of Mexico takes place, of Tenochtitlan, and the takeover of the Caribbean, then they can send people up north. And so there's going to be this one man named Narvaez, who's going to lead an expedition first out of Havana, Cuba, into Florida. And he's going to run into the swamplands of Florida and be very frustrated. Pánfilo de Narvaez is, in his adventure, is going to mete out justice as he encounters native peoples with a sword. And he will not survive the expedition. And in order to move and try to find riches, which they will be frustrated because they will not be able to encounter major cities, centralized state societies, especially once they hit the coast of Florida, they will encounter the Timucua and the Calusa indigenous peoples. And what will happen is as they attempt to leave the swamplands of Florida, they're going to encounter a storm. Everyone will I think it's only going to be about 15 survivors, and there will be this one man named Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, and he will, there will be about 15 of them. If you can see this map, they will land after a storm on Galveston Bay, which is close to Houston today. De Vaca is going to survive and experience, along with an African slave named Esteban, this fact that there's a black male and a white male is going to intrigue the native populations. They will encounter a group known as the Carancahuas. The Carancahuas eventually are going to befriend him. And when you take a look at this particular artist's rendition, the Carancahuas are going to introduce De Vaca to some healing plants, and as De Vaca moves through Texas onto the Rio Grande area, there will be native peoples who will be ill, and De Vaca is going to, Cabeza de Vaca is going to assist in the healing of these native peoples, that eventually he's going to get a reputation that wherever he goes, people will be waiting for this healer. Eventually, he's going to be the first to go through the Rio Grande, move west across the Chihuahua and Sonora mountain ranges today, the Sierra Occidental, and eventually come down the coastline of Mexico into what will eventually become Acapulco, and then go into Mexico City. His journey of 1528 is going to spark interest in Mexico's far northern frontier. De Vaca is going to, Cabeza de Vaca is going to eventually argue for native people's rights. He will be one of the first to be sharing with everyone else that native peoples are in fact human beings, that they should not be considered savages. This journey and his statements in the Audiencia in central Mexico is going to lead to successive reconnoitering adventures. There's Francisco Vázquez de Coronado. Francisco Vázquez de Coronado is another adventurer who's going to hear about the stories of the Anasazi, the Hohokam, and the Mogollon, and is going to want to visit to see if he can find these cities of these state centralized societies that I was sharing with you in the previous presentations. But what's going to happen, of course, is by that time, native populations are going to be adjusting to the disease, and so wherever Francisco Vázquez de Coronado goes, he's not going to be able to run into what native peoples had always said were the major trading areas up in the north. In fact, one of the reasons why many of these reconnoitering adventurers are moving up north is that they want to find out about the stories that people in central Mexico and people in the Caribbean have about the Mississippian state centralized societies such as Cahokia and Aztlan, or the southwestern cultures such as the Mogollon, the Hohokam, and the Anasazi. Francisco Vázquez de Coronado is going to go through Chihuahua. He's supposedly passing through El Paso to Oklahoma and eventually up towards Kansas. He will be frustrated for not finding, again, state centralized societies. But Francisco Vázquez de Coronado is another famous adventurer, conquistador, who had plans of visions of grandeur. There's another man named Hernando de Soto. Hernando de Soto is very important because he's going to lay out the map for the southeastern part of what becomes the United States. Hernando de Soto will go into Florida through to Georgia. He will visit eventually these states known as Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. And it is probable that he encountered the native peoples in the state centralized society known as today in Atlanta, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, Georgia, known as Etowah. He will be frustrated because the native populations will not produce the tribute that he desires, and so he will use the sword. Hernando de Soto, when he returns his adventurers, he will allow for the mapping of the North American continent. Then there's Juan Rodriguez de Cabrillo. Juan Rodriguez de Cabrillo is going to follow, actually it will be a priest named Fray Marcos de Niza, who will go up to Sonora and then Arizona and then New Mexico. And then Juan Rodriguez de Cabrillo will move from New Mexico west to California. And he will not survive going across the California deserts. It will be completed by Bartolome Ferrelo. Now, what I'm trying to share with you is that this interest in north from Mexico, the Spanish are moving up north to try to lay claim to the continent. And this was because in the doctrine of discovery is first in time, first in right, with regards, and you have to lay the flag out so that Spain can begin to lay claim to certain territories through the doctrine of discovery against usurpations by the French or the British, because the French are now moving into areas that are up in Canada, and then eventually the British will be challenging everyone. So the Spanish are moving up north, laying their flags, trying to understand the region, create maps of what it is that they are laying claim to. And this is why I call them reconnoitering adventurers. But let's go to a film clip that will end this particular segment. So I just wanted to make this particular segment so that you could understand the significance of the doctrine of discovery and going out and laying claim to territory by sending adventurers to see if there's any wealth. And then, of course, Jesus comes with them. So it's Christ and money, and this is what it's all about. So let's go to a film clip by Michael Wood. Michael Wood is a famous anthropologist who have studied the world, cultures, and he wrote a book called Conquistadores, and they turned it into a documentary. In this particular case, he's going to share with us the beginnings of Narvaez's journey and how Cabeza de Vaca eventually is going to make it to Texas.
The Spanish had called this Florida, the land of flowers, but they found a strange and evil country. That summer, over 300 conquistadors struggled through these swamps. Their leader, Panfilo de Narvaez, was arrogant and incompetent. They had no interpreters. Their food supplies ran out. And worse, they were picked off by hostile tribes. The last survivors of those native peoples are still here, the Seminole. They have fiercely defended their independence ever since.
So you were the only Native American people within the USA who never submitted?
Right. Only tribe to never sign a treaty of submission. The elements of Florida, a very, very good ally.
The elements of Florida are a very good ally.
Right. Snakes and alligators, Europeans worried more about them. Again, these people had no knowledge of Florida.
Narvaez had been licensed by the King of Spain to discover and conquer Florida. He hoped to find cities here with large populations and gold. Instead, he found a poor landscape totally unsuitable for colonization. But he pushed his army on, further into the nightmare. If only Narvaez had come here to seek the well-being of the Indians, one Spaniard wrote, and not to wade through their blood to gain ill-gotten wealth. But his capacities did not come up to his dreams. With autumn coming on, the expedition was on the point of collapse. Hoping now just to save their lives, they struggled down to the sea below Tallahassee. But there was no sign of their ships. The fleet had given them up for dead.
They're starving, disillusioned. And Narvaez weighs up the situation. He thinks that the Spanish settlements in Mexico are only a few leagues down that coast. In fact, they're 1,000 miles. So he decides to build boats to escape. And on the 22nd of September, nearly 300 survivors set sail in 5 barges.
In terrible weather, they tried to sail across the Gulf of Mexico, past the Mississippi. Narvaez himself was never seen again. We would know nothing of this story but for the captain of one of the barges, a young Spanish gentleman called Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. Cabeza de Vaca wrote a remarkable account of his adventures, and with it we set out to follow him across the Gulf of Mexico to find out which way wind and tide might have taken him that autumn.
And if he was coming out of this part of Florida, you can see the green arrows indicate the current and the speed here. And as you see, it gets pretty swift right along the Mississippi Delta.
The arrows showing the predominant direction.
That's the predominant direction of the current. Occasionally, though, you have a lot of fronts that will come through, push the wind offshore, and those tend to be very strong winds that will push offshore and build up great seas. But the predominant wind is from the southeast.
Oh, that's very interesting, because when they pass the Mississippi mouth, they get caught up in a storm coming from the north that blows them right out to sea and nearly drowns them. In fact, they mentioned that.
In the end, says Cabeza de Vaca, we commended ourselves to God and the dangers of the sea. And there was not a man among us who did not think that death was certain. None of us had any idea of navigation. For 6 weeks we were lost. eating rotten maize, drinking seawater, which drove some men mad. I was at the helm that night. I had prepared to die. And then, in the darkness, we heard breakers. We were near land. It was the 6th of November, 1528. At dawn, they came inshore. But the boat capsized in the surf. Too weak to swim, some of the men were drowned. They found themselves on a wind-swept shore, unseen before by white men. Galveston Island, Texas.
How far up do you think they went?
Given how weak he was, I don't think he could probably went much further than you're going.
One of them climbed an oak tree to see where they were.
I can see it! I can see the bay!
Yeah.
I think they guessed the island was about half a league wide, maybe a mile and a half or so. That would be about right, would it?
At the widest point.
Yeah.
And then they could actually, on a good clear day like today, see the mainland across the bay. And you recognize that you're on an island.
But the island was inhabited by Karankawa Indians.
They were hunter-gatherers, and they only came here during the fall. They usually left at the end of February and the beginning of March in the spring, and would return to the mainland.
Yeah.
And but this was their kind of, you might call their winter residence, like the New Yorkers go to Florida.
We had expected to be sacrificed, says Cabeza de Vaca. But when the Indians saw our misery, they sat down with us and began to weep too. Those uncivilized, savage men were sorry for us, and they shared what little food they had.
You look at all these great expeditions of the conquistadors and the terrible events that happened through the New World, Cortez and Pizarro and everything else, and here's a story where the man begins here on this spot to become the other, doesn't he?
Exactly.
And it's the Indians who give him the first clue to this transformation, isn't it? They cry for him,
Yeah.
and he realizes the common humanity. Don't you think?
They saw people destitute, in pain. They were moved by compassion to help them and aid them in the process. And so they saved Cabeza de Vaca to their own detriment.
They were exterminated.
They were exterminated.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The Karankawas began to die of European diseases that same winter. They vanished for good in the course of the 18th century. But they kept Cabeza de Vaca alive with the food of the island.
That's razor sharp.
So there's a great oyster bed running all the way down
Yes,
this little inlet.
yes, and there are places out here where their oysters are several miles, and during low tide they're exposed.
Okay, so we can appreciate something about the quote-unquote conquistadores. Okay, again, how many times do we encounter anthropologists and those who are not part of the native experience describing an environment to kind of enhance the experiences of the Europeans, because after all, they are these explorers, they are these conquerors. They're having a very difficult time with a hostile environment, with hostile native peoples, never appreciating the fact that native peoples have been surviving for thousands of years in these environments. And then, of course, here in this particular case, Cabeza de Vaca being assisted by the Karankawa, and the Karankawa sharing their foods with these survivors, that it convinces Cabeza de Vaca that perhaps these peoples are human. And this is, again, you need to kind of take a look at what lens that you're using, what lens are you using to understand the experiences of these original, initial encounters. Native peoples understand very clearly what Europeans are up to. They already know that as they arrive. And so the Europeans themselves already have this attitude towards these peoples as being savage. And so when you read the journals, as European anthropologists, as American anthropologists read the journals, they of course impose their prejudices on that experience instead of understanding the ethnographic record with regards to native peoples' subsistence practices, ecologically sensitive subsistence practices, and yet the statements do come out. So that's what we need to understand and appreciate with regards to the reconnoitering adventures and mapping out what Spain is laying claim to. So we'll finish that segment.